there's something to this. There is something to this spirituality and this tradition and like this just like passing down of connection. We have a through line that goes back thousands of years, and that is astonishing. And I would hate to see that go away. And I also don't want us to be doing Judaism or any religion in the same way as our grandparents or great-great-grandparents or the way we go back. It should be ours. They say every rabbi, every preacher has one sermon, and mine is we need you and you need this. Be part of a tribe and make it yours.
It's Uncommon Good, the podcast where we chat to ordinary people doing uncommon good in service of our common humanity. My name is Paulie Reese. Fam, I am delighted beyond measure to bring you today my pal, Rabbi Emily Cohen. She's the spiritual leader of the West End Synagogue in New York City. She's ordained in Reconstructionist Judaism, and she's the host of the podcast, Jew 2, Tales of the Mixed Multitude. Quick content warning off the top. We have an indirect discussion of anti-Semitism, of white privilege and white supremacy, dealing with COVID as a faith leader, a discussion of discrimination against patrilineal Jews, non-Ashkenazi Jews, and queer Jews. So as always, if these things are not right for you to listen to, feel free to switch this one off, and we will catch you in the next one. Emily goes on to talk about Reconstructionist Judaism, writing the Hamilton Haggadah, and getting it in front of Lin Manuel Miranda, the importance of Passover and storytelling, the theological politics of marriage and patrilineal Judaism, and the work of raising rabble to bring more marginalized voices to the center. It was such a treat and a privilege to catch up with Emily, hear about the work, and where she sees a contemporary Judaism going. Please enjoy my chat to Rabbi Emily.
The last time we collaborated meaningfully was a mutual love of choral music. Singing one of the rarest performed, I think is still fair to say, masterworks in the Thomas Tallis Spem in Allium.
It was awesome. So Spem and Allium is a 40-part piece. So most choral pieces are like, you know, you might have soprano, alto, tenor, bass. Maybe within those parts they split and you have like an 8-part piece. Occasionally you even have splits within the splits and you could have like up to 16 parts, but 40 is insane. 40 is having these different quartets like spread around the space, all singing. And so they interacted with one another. I was the soprano for the final group that entered. So it began with like the first group, and then it went all the way around to like the 8th or 9th or something. And so one of the craziest parts about where we performed, which was in the rotunda, is that there was such a delay with the reverb that you couldn't trust your ears. You had to look at the conductor and know from like where the beats were falling, where you had to come in. Because if you just listened to the people, you would not come in at the right time. And like most of the time with choral singing, the decay isn't that long.
Yes.
But it was a crazy exercise in trust, among other things. Just like trusting the conductor's hands, and like not trusting one's ears, which for a lot of singers is not intuitive. You know, we're used to listening and figuring out where to come in. But it was so fun. And that experience, I don't think I've ever had anything quite like it, especially because it was also, I don't know if you remember this, Polly, it was freezing. Like we were all wearing coats, you know, like as we were singing. So, you know, people in the audience had blankets. And so it was just like this very sensory experience that was unlike anything else I think I've ever done.
Yes. I forgot about that. But I remember having purchased special fingerless mittens just to be able to use for that performance.
And then I'm in this choir now in New York called Coracos, which I like to joke that like it's the kind of thing that in any other city would be professional, but because in New York there's 1.5 billion people that have lovely musical talents. It's completely amateur. Like there are professional-ish folks in it, but it's an amateur group. We don't pay, we aren't paid, etc. But it's been so much fun. And in 2019, we went to Serbia, which is a long story, like how we ended up going there as opposed to anywhere else. But it was an amazing trip, just in the sense that it was a part of the world that most of us had never spent significant time in.
Yeah.
And we got to be not only in Belgrade, but also in these little towns. Like we were participating in this international choral festival in Negotin, which is like tiny little town in Serbia. But two moments there. One was that we sang, again, kind of organically in the crypt of this church. There was this piece that we got to sing that was by like one of the most well-known Serbian composers, and we just like, there was a little subgroup of us just like that were on a tour on a day off on the and we just started singing this thing, and the the locals and the tourists were just like kind of amazed by this group of people. Hopefully our Serbian sounded okay. And then the other moment on that trip was we sang in an art gallery, also in like a relatively small town, and it was packed. The love that the locals had for choral music was like insane. Like we sing in a church in New York, and we're lucky to get like 100 people.
Right.
And in Serbia, like they packed every space that we performed in. Like it was just so much respect and love for choral music.
Yes.
And so those are some of the top ones. I mean, I'm sure there's others. I've been very, very lucky, but those are a few.
A note tells me here that we both are fans of at least a little bit the Lin Manuel Miranda verse.
Yeah, I saw Freestyle Love Supreme when it came back to Broadway. I think it was one of the I forget if it was just before COVID or if it was one of the first shows I saw after COVID. It was like the last few years have gotten so fuzzy. I want to say I saw it before COVID though, with a friend of mine, because it was one of those things where like I had the opportunity to get last minute tickets for not very much money, and I just remember like getting two of them and being like, who's gonna come with me, but Chris Jackson was there, which was amazing. They had kind of like rotating guest folks, and he happened to be in that evening, and it was just super fun. But yeah, it's interesting. I've never seen Hamilton on Broadway. I saw it in San Francisco when it was on tour. I enter the lottery kind of regularly, but maybe this is just being way too naive, but with a number of Broadway shows that I know are not going anywhere, I just sort of enter the lottery perpetually, because I'm just like, I don't want to spend $300 on 2 tickets, but since I live here, I'll just eventually win is the hope, I guess.
Being on the topic of Lin Manuel Miranda, I would love to ask you about the Hamilton adaptation that you co-wrote.
Oh, this is so sweet. This is also going back. Yeah. So this was, we started this in like, I don't even know. I want to say like 2015, maybe 2014, 2016, somewhere in that range of years. And this came about, I mean, I feel like a lot of my stuff has been a combo of organic like geekiness and luck. So this certainly fell into that category. My friend Jake and I, Rabbi Jake Best-Adler, he's in Jersey now, at a synagogue there. He and I used to carpool a lot to rabbinical school. We lived in Mount Airy, and the rabbinical school is out in like Jenkintown, Elkins Park area. So it was like a 15-minute drive. And I had an old Jetta that couldn't connect to an MP3 player. So I had CDs, and so I had, CDs that I'd made of the Hamilton soundtrack, like from the MP3s or whatever. And so we would listen to that. I think I introduced Jake to Hamilton, and then somehow like he found out about someone who had written on Twitter or Facebook or something, like a joke about doing a Hamilton Haggadah, and then we actually took it seriously. And so, Passover was coming up, and we thought it'd be really fun to just like parody some songs. I think the first one we did was the 10 dual commandments or something. But we made it, the 10 plague. I don't know. We did something like with the 10 plagues for that, and then we just kept playing with it. And recording it all on GarageBand, with I don't think I even had a USB mic at that point. And so it was just plugging in headphones and dubbing over ourselves. But we put the lyrics on a Google Doc, and then it was just for us. It was literally just for us, for fun. But then we put it on Facebook because we were like, hey, we wrote these things, friends. Look at this. And then I just remember getting a text from somebody being like, you might want to put your name on that Google Doc. And we logged on, and there were 30, 40 people on it, that we didn't know. And so then we were like, and so we started trying to formalize it a little bit more. But the fun thing that happened was that the next year we wanted to complete a Haggadah. And so we actually got an independent study credit to take this parody thing and form it into a fully fledged Haggadah, which we then asked people to donate to HeyAlma if they were going to download it. So HeyAlma is an organization that works with refugees and immigrants, and we thought it fit with the theme of the Hamilton story, that and also with Passover, of course, and the idea of coming away from narrowness, from Mitzrayim, from Egypt, into expansiveness, that we would connect it with HeyAlma. And so it was really fun. It was and the recordings are incredibly embarrassing. I cannot rap. And I tried, and then I put it on the internet. So that's out there, but I don't recommend looking at it. So yeah, but it was such a fun little 15 minutes of fame blip, that we got to go through.
I feel like the phrase construction, I cannot X, but I tried, is the start of every idea that could become something that changes the world.
Maybe. Tell me more about that. What have you tried and then been I can't do this, but I'm doing it anyway, and it's going to change the world?
Well, rap. So big shout out to Freestyle Love Supreme Academy, now FLS Plus. At the time of taping here, we're in mid-January. That company is slowly reemerging from lockdowns and thinking about in-person live music experiences again. And now, but yeah, so I took their coursework. It's that Dunning-Kruger thing. I know just enough about the history of this genre, this beautiful art form, to know how poorly I do it. Number one. I'll say the same thing about Christian sacred texts and exegesis, the same way. Know just enough to know how badly I do it. I'll say the same thing about speaking Spanish. And generally speaking, I'll say the same thing about long-form comedy improv. I'll never, if ever they reform in a meaningful way, I'll never be on a Friday night team at Upright Citizens Brigade, but I play.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Do you know if either Bill Sherman or Lin ever found out about the parody, if they ever heard it?
I think he did find out. Lin did find out about it, and the reason that happened is because this woman who was one of the assistant stage managers found it, who happened to be Jewish, and she wrote an email to Jake and me, which we completely flipped out over, because it was somebody who worked on the crew of Hamilton, you know, and she asked would it be okay if I showed this to Lin and the cast, and we're like, that would be okay. So I have no idea how much, if any, he actually saw or heard, but some people on Hamilton knew that this existed. And then the fun little follow-up to that is that the next year I had a podcast that's been on hiatus for 2+ years now, which I still have hopes to bring back at some point, but I have not for a while. But anyway, it was about the experiences of Jews in interfaith families and with multiple influences in their families and homes in some way. And we were doing a Hanukkah episode, and And so I was trying to get sound bites from different communities about their holiday celebrations, like how they combined multiple holidays or celebrated in different ways. And so I reached out to this same assistant stage manager, and I just said to her, hey, like, I remember you mentioning at some point that there was a Hanukkah party with the cast and crew of Hamilton. Like, do you have anything from that? And she did. She had this video of them doing the Hanukkah blessings and was willing to like send me a soundbite from it. So I have like on some episode of this podcast a little soundbite of like I think David Diggs and some of the other folks on Hamilton doing the Hanukkah blessings, which was so fun.
Beautiful. That podcast is Jew too.
Jew too. Tales of the Mixed Multitude.
I had a bit of a listen. It was delightful. Are there any stories in addition to the Hamilton blessing that stand out from your podcasting days?
I don't think there's not a specific story that's coming to mind, but I would say that like my overall experience of the podcast was really an experience of unintentionally helping a lot of people to feel less alone, which is one of my kind of life goals, I guess, as a human, as a rabbi, is like to help people feel connected. And so I would get these like emails periodically from folks who would be like, I listened to these episodes and like, I come from a family that, is like Jewish and has Catholic people in it, or like, whatever. And like, just like feeling okay and seen for who they were, or at least, if not fully seen, understood a little bit better. It's in the Jewish world, this is like getting a little bit niche, I guess, for like a more like general audience, but just to name that, like, there's a lot of growth that's happening in the Jewish world right now around inclusivity, as I know there is in much of the rest of the world, and like, thank goodness. But the Jewish world, for understandable reasons, tends to be skeptical of difference, because difference often comes with, and now we're going to kill you or kick you out of the place where you've been living for a couple generations, or whatever it may be.
Yes.
So it's an understandable fear of outsiders, and it is an extremely damaging one that I think we are, as an overall Jewish community, working to fix. But what that means in practice is that people who are, pick your adjective, people who are queer, people who are, people of color, anything but like Ashkenazi presenting, people who are like disabled in some respect, people who come from families where there's multiple religious influences, people who've converted, and I could keep going and going, are all often less welcome in mainstream Jewish spaces than they should be in the United States. And that is something that my podcast was an attempt to look at, and that I know a lot of amazing work's being done around. But it's really easy for these folks who have a total claim to the Jewish community to feel like it's not worth claiming that, because why would you want to deal with all these people who are just being skeptical and sometimes overtly mean or hostile to you? And I believe really strongly that the Jewish world is stronger for all of the different elements that are a part of it. And I want to create a Jewish world, and a world in general, where like people can bring their full selves.
Yeah.
And the podcast, I guess, was just a little attempt to do that. And it was really lovely to see that was in some way successful, even if it was like more of a starfish effect than like a systemic effect. But I would love to be able to do more of that work.
Well, some of the work of this podcast in particular is to lean into as you say, some of these niche ideas, and to open them, and for lack of a better word that I haven't found yet, to translate them to a culturally uninitiated audience. So if it's all right with you, I would love to lean in a little bit more. I know you from some of your writings on HeyAlma, and in your Twitter and in your Facebook. And you're a great follow, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. And the one conversation that I remember us having in person, because that was so long ago, you told, and at the time you were a student in the Reconstructionist movement. Do I still have that correct? For the uninitiated, the culturally uninitiated, can you tell me a little bit more about what that means to be a Reconstructionist?
Absolutely. So the Reconstructionist movement, fun fact, when you are in rabbinical school, you have to take a class called Reconstructionist Judaism 101 or something to that effect. And the final for that class is an elevator pitch on what Reconstructionism is, because can be so complicated to explain in just a few words. So at that class I took like 9-10 years ago, so I don't remember my pitch, but I can say a few basic things, which are things like the Reconstructionist movement is probably among the newest movements of mainstream American Judaism. It is distinctly American in that it was founded here by a rabbi named Mordecai Kaplan, who was especially active in the first part of the 20th century, going into like mid-20th century. And there were a few ways that Kaplan was different from your average rabbi. One thing that set him apart in a major way was that he did not believe in Jews as a chosen people. So if you look at Jewish liturgy, traditional liturgy, you'll see a lot of Jews being chosen from amongst all of the peoples of the world or being separated in some way. And Kaplan said, no, like we are not a chosen people. Like we opt into Judaism, or that's like more of a modern take, that we opt into Judaism together. But that he said something along the lines of the Jewish religion doesn't exist, the Jewish religion exists for the Jews. Jews do not exist for the religion. So the idea that it's people-centered. He also, more than any other leader, talked about the notion of Judaism not only as a religion, but as a civilization, and as a civilization that evolves over the course of, at this point, millennia. So the idea being that, for sure, it's a faith, but it's also something that is a part of your culture, your overall sense of how you are in the world. So what Kaplan said is that Jews live in two civilizations. They live in the Jewish civilization where tonight Shabbat will begin. It's Friday, so this evening we'll go into Shabbat.
Right.
And we also live in the secular world where it's Friday and like it's the end of the work week, in theory, unless you're a rabbi or whatever, and then you have to keep working. And so we're always holding both. We're always having to figure out how to hold our secular identities with our Jewish identities.
Sure.
And part of that is, again, with this notion of an evolving religious civilization, the idea that Jewish tradition gets a vote, but not a veto in how we operate today. So me, female rabbi who comes from an interfaith upbringing, or, Jewish upbringing in an interfaith household.
Yeah.
I would not have been deemed anything near appropriate to be a rabbi 1,000 years ago, or even a few hundred years ago.
Sure.
But we are in a time now where we have evolved such that we understand that it doesn't make sense to bar rabbis or bar women or non-binary folks or other like people that would have been barred from the rabbinate hundreds of years ago from the rabbinate today.
Yeah.
And so that's just one example. There's a billion of them, but always trying to think about like, what does tradition teach us? And then how do we actually make our decisions today in consultation with both tradition and modern sensibilities? Philly, I should just say, is also like kind of the unofficial headquarters. I mean, it's the official headquarters of the movement, and that's where the movement is based, but also like there are probably more Reconstructionist synagogues per capita in Philly than anywhere else. And there's probably more Reconstructionist Jews per capita in Philly than anywhere else because of that. So, if you were to be in many other major cities in the United States, there might be at most one Reconstructionist shul, and most of the Jews you'd meet would not be Reconstructionist or know what Reconstructionism is. But sort of like how, in Philadelphia, people know what Quakers are. Like, I think in Philly, people who know about Judaism generally have some experience with Reconstructionist Jews, which is kind of cool.
I would love to sort of pivot us just a little bit. We'll come back. Gritty or the Philadelphia Fanatic?
Gritty. I don't understand how that's a question. I'm sorry. It's
Yeah.
obviously gritty.
It gritty. It gritty. And then our crazy celebrations, which require the city to keep a supply of telephone and street lamp grease.
Grease.
Is this like a really good like stress release valve, or is this potentially problematic?
I think, not to get on my high horse, but I think it's mostly just an intense reflection of the complete difference with which rowdy white men and rowdy not white men are treated. And yeah, I'm not a football fan, I should say. So that's like another thing is like, but no, I'm all for people enjoying themselves, but the way that people got away with that, and the amount of damage associated, and then I see the way that others in the city are treated for much more minor incidents. I grease those poles and, like, hopefully nobody gets hurt.
Let's just say that you'll never see me attempting to mount the awning of the marquee of the Four Seasons Hotel. No thanks. Or the Ritz-Carlton, or whichever it was.
I forget which it was.
They brought out the pole grease for the Phillies in the World Series this past summer as well.
They did?
So apparently it's an equal opportunity offender sort of situation, I suppose. But
wow.
Wow, indeed. Thanks for the little trip down Philly memory lane there.
Yeah.
What is the most delicious thing you've eaten at Reading Terminal? Do you remember?
I don't know. I haven't been there for years. When I moved to New York, I had this thought that I would get to Philly at least twice a year, because I was like, it's an hour and a half on the train. Like, it's so easy. And then I got busy, and then a pandemic happened. So I think I've been to Philly all of like twice in the last 4 years, which is insane. So it's been a while since I've been to Reading, but I just remember, I think it's like, as with many food markets, like Chelsea Market in New York is the same and things like that. It's less about like what did I actually sample, and more about just like walking around and like seeing all the stuff and smelling all the stuff. Like, it's like a full sensory experience. And so I don't remember what I eat half the time when I go to these places, because it's just like I've smelled so much already that I'm just like excited to like carry all of that with me, and then whatever I actually sample.
Yeah, you've got the smell of the fish and the dim sum and the barbecue and the markets, not just the ready to eateries, but all of the producers, the butchers and the poultry mongers, etc. So I want to loop back to something again for those of us uninitiated. Could you tell us what the term you used, Haggadah, means?
Oh, sure. Yeah. A Haggadah literally means the telling, and it is the book that accompanies a Passover Seder. So it's, which means order, but it's a special meal that you do for Passover. And so there are lots of different kinds of Haggadot, which is the plural of Haggadah, everything from like very straightforward traditional ones to like, themed ones like the Hamilton Haggadah, to like ones for kids, ones for families. Like, I have probably at least a dozen Haggadot that I've collected over the years, and they're all different and they're all delightful.
Yeah. I'm trying to imagine like the craziest ones to where like a devoted liturgical theologian could have adapted one, like like Rick and Morty or Star Wars.
There's definitely Star Wars. There's definitely like what else have I seen? Yeah, there's a bunch. There's a Mrs. Maisel one.
Nice.
There's like I mean, for basically any pop culture phenomenon, you're gonna have some kind of, if not a full Haggadah supplement.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
I love that. I love both the notion of fandom, but also the amount of, I would imagine, the amount of liturgical knowledge a person would need in order to do that well.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. You know, Passover is one of the few things that even very secular Jews often take part in some way.
Sure.
Like they're invited to a Seder, or like even if they don't belong to a synagogue or do anything else on a regular basis, they'll host a Seder with their family. And it's like often a long meal.
Yeah.
And so the Haggadot can be like a really lovely way in for people who are not as like into the traditional rituals. 'Cause it's like, it's fun to have the different illustrations, to have like the to-dos along the way, and to have like a little explanation. So, you know, I think a Haggadah is not just a guidebook, but really like an essential way of drawing folks in. And in some ways, like it feels like a very Reconstructionist thing to have these hybrid Haggadot, because like with like a pop culture thing, because they're saying, here's something that you like that's in like your day-to-day life, and here's something that's like part of your Jewish engagement, and we're gonna make them go mush, more or less.
Yeah. I would like to lean into something a term you mentioned there in passing. At least in my experience of working in spiritual leadership and in Christian traditions, it is less socially acceptable to Christian clergy, and probably to folks who would identify more as secular, to think of the term of a secular Christian. I think mostly because a lot of the people who would claim probably more to be, if anything, I would say would lean closer to the term of ex-Christian. A lot of times because of traumatic formative experiences with the culture, with issues of community building and lack of attention to, as you've identified with Reconstructionism, to social justice issues, to inclusivity. It's just not a term, I think, that is socially, perhaps even theologically acceptable in a broad Christian sense, because of how exclusive, I would say, Christianity tends to see itself. Can you say a little bit more about what you see as the culture of secular sort of like Judaism space?
Sure. I mean, I think like what you're saying makes sense to me, that like it's harder to be a secular Christian, and correct me if I'm like not articulating this in the way that you think is accurate, but you know, my understanding is that Christianity really is based around a belief structure. Like there's a lot of wiggle room within that belief structure, to be sure, but like there is a theology that is sort of centered in Christian understanding of the world. And if you are not somebody who partakes in that theology, it's going to be harder for you to feel a sense of connectivity to the Christian tradition. And again, I'm saying this as an outsider, so like, you know, if I'm being off base at all, please correct me in that.
No, I think that that's right. I mean, a central tenet of my experience of Christianity, of my experience of studying it, in going to a Christian seminary, is that the creeds and having right belief as much, or as many beliefs as an individual sect of Christianity might say are necessary, or not, regardless of how many things you have to believe correctly in order to be Christian. But that's still important.
Right.
So I think you're on there, but please.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm glad I didn't mess that up. So I think one of the ways that is really different from Judaism is that for sure there are beliefs in Jewish practice. There are Jewish theologies that most Jews probably hold some belief in, and Judaism, as I mentioned before, is more than just a faith. It is a culture.
Yeah.
There is if you go to myancestry.com, it says that I'm 50% or whatever Ashkenazi Jewish, which, Judaism is not a genetic thing. You cannot say you're Jewish because of your genetics, but you can say that you have Jewish heritage due to genetics, in a way that on my mom's side, we're pretty sure that her mother came from a Sephardic Jewish background, but we have no means of proving that because those particular genes are mixed enough with the rest of the Iberian gene pool that you can't piece them apart from one another. But there's, there is a sense of culture and identity that goes beyond faith itself. So there are Jewish atheists, and that is in many, many Jewish spaces completely normal. There are Jews who don't really partake in synagogue life in any meaningful way, who might not have, coming of age rituals like a bar mitzvah, but who are still part of this Jewish heritage. And the other thing is I think especially given the current upsurge in anti-Semitic rhetoric, it's important to name that when you are deemed Jewish, you can't take that off even if you want to. So I know people that were not raised religiously Jewish at all, but they are still considered to be Jewish due to having Jewish parentage, and being a part of that community. So it's in some ways an identity that you can choose to set aside, but it is also an identity that others who don't like Jews might force upon you, even if you would rather not have it as part of who you are. Jewish identity is really confusing, and I think that's why secular Judaism is really important, because you shouldn't have to be part of a religion if you don't want to be part of that religion.
Heaven forbid. To all of our listeners across traditions of belief and spirituality, as we would say in Christian traditions, that will preach. I want to lean into that idea a little bit more about. I don't know that even the language of religious freedom is the right thing to say, but the capacity for choice and to find whatever system of belief, faith, no faith, spirituality, that we have. I think I sense this among traditions of faith sort of happening now, but and maybe this is just a Christian perspective, and this is a little bit too totalizing for me to say, but it certainly feels like in many faith traditions that I've observed recently, there has been a pressure to stake a claim and regardless of whatever it is, to lean in, to find one's tribe, as it were. And maybe it's not even religion, but it's some other sort of guiding principle of belief, that society, culture is pushing us to stake identity in a meaningful, perhaps even dividing way. Am I potentially onto something, or am I grasping at straws here?
I think you're totally onto something, and it's a big deal. I'm really into the work by Casper ter Kuile, and I think Angie Thurston. They were up at Harvard Div, I believe, and they did all this work on circles of community. And so like I've heard this spoken about as like 3 big circles. You have like your most intimate people, like the folks that you live with, the folks that like you could call at 3 a.m., like if something was going wrong, like your most inner people. You have your outer circle, which are like the people that are sort of in your circuit, like the person that you might not necessarily know their name or much more than their name, but you see them around. And then you have this middle circle, which are like the people who once upon a time would have been the folks at your church or in your bowling league or, whatever else, at the PTA that you went to. And that's the circle that's shrinking. Because of social media, people are getting more and more acquaintance level connections. And due to the pandemic, like most of us kind of settled into like, okay, who are our call at 3 a.m. people? But that middle circle is kind of crucial and we're missing it. And so, we're seeing even with secular organizations, like I was reading this yesterday, I forget whose Instagram this was, but somebody was writing about how like Soul Cycle now is starting to have these sessions that are like about light stretching and like conversation about like deep topics, which is like the kind of thing that you would do with like a circle of community. And people are missing that. I think that like, I don't necessarily believe in having a singular tribe, that it's like, okay, I am Jewish, that is my tribe. Although there is like this kind of joking reference of Jews as like MOT, like members of the tribe. But I do believe that like we do need community. And especially, we're both millennials-ish, like I think that our generation has done a really bad job of finding those communities because we were thrown into social media like as soon as we were adults, and that changed a lot of the way that we interacted with one another as young adults. And so, whether it is a synagogue or a church or a choir, I mean, I think one of the reasons that music matters so much is because it does create that shared community around a shared interest that is deeply spiritual. Like you can say you're not a spiritual person if you sing, but you are. Because there's like something about that. So I do think that we really need to be working more, in a lot of my work. The way that I see New York City is like there are more unaffiliated Jews here than there are probably anywhere else in the United States. And I want them to show up and affiliate, not for the sake of like making my shul a mega shul. That is not a goal. But in the sense of like, I think that there's something to this. There's something to this spirituality and this tradition and like this just like passing down of connection. Like we have a through line that goes back thousands of years. And that is astonishing. And I would hate to see that go away. And I also don't want us to be doing Judaism or any religion in the same way as our grandparents or great-great-grandparents or the way we go back. It should be ours.
Yeah.
But I think that like what I guess like they say every rabbi, every preacher has one sermon, and mine is like, we need you and you need this. And this can change, but like, yes, be part of a tribe and make it yours is my little mini sermon.
Thank you. That clip will immediately go to TikTok. Because again, to bring it on back again, that will preach.
How's TikTok, by the way, for you? Like I mean, I don't know. Like maybe this is taking us a direction you weren't planning to go.
No, let's
go.
But
I am curious. I'm curious about social media, and like I know that when you sent me even info about the podcast, you were like, we're gonna put things on YouTube and on TikTok and on like whatever else, and like, I'm curious in your own ministry, such as it is, in your own like work around all of this, how do you see social media fitting in to helping people connect?
I'm still in the information gathering phase. Like that phase, I mean, what it's like because you've produced a podcast that's run that ran across 3-4 years. Like that early phase, you're just trying to get into the cycle of consistently producing content and holding yourself accountable to producing enough content to where you can find your tribe and you can figure out who needs to hear like what you're producing, right? And finding your voice at the same time. The strategic work of this podcast and the media company that's producing it, Uncommon Media, on all socials, whatever, is like to build, as you say, that sort of third circle of friends that like might be somewhat culturally affiliated, but at least in a way to have to go back to what we built culturally in the 90s of being able to tolerate each other's differences and to not react with physical, psychological, or intellectual violence as the instinct, is to sort of build that space and to draw in a lot of different voices and to find the common humanity and dignity underneath. So to the extent that you have to find ways of engaging people who think differently, I think social media, at least for now, is accomplishing the goal. My most favorite hate tweet was my first video that I released on YouTube, and it wasn't about my guest, who told a wonderfully hilarious anecdote about having a childhood crush on the Back to the Future Leah Thompson. And because I was wearing a strong red lip and I'm a male-bodied person, they were like, what was it? Like, why is he wearing red lipstick? And I responded, intentionally misinterpreting that person's quote. Oh, because that's just my favorite shade. So I don't know. Like what I hope social media will do is allow us to at least, and if for some reason it becomes more whether either socially or politically legislated, that it will at least give us the framework to start building a little bit more accessible community. I think that like the thing that we were always told that Facebook could have been or was designed to be, but ultimately we now understand had nothing to do with Facebook, right?
Yeah.
So like I guess I'm trying to co-opt social media for my own purposes, same as everyone else.
That makes sense. That makes sense.
Yeah, but who knows? At Uncommon Good Pod on TikTok, and Instagram and YouTube and all the other things. But it's a very good question, right? Like, because like the question that I think we're kind of revolving around is how we form community, how we form the self inside, and what systems of belief we use to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And now we're not just talking about those systems, but we're specifically talking about the delivery mechanism, since it's so specifically mandated. Like, we have 3 minutes on TikTok. We have at like in an Instagram reel, you have at most 90 seconds. In a YouTube short, you have 60 seconds. So how do you break down the important nugget of a reading, say in a text that's common to the two of our traditions, deuterocanonical law, yeah, in the course of 90 seconds?
Right. It's a huge question. Yeah. And I've gotten into trouble on Twitter at times for writing a thread that people don't read, so it's like they'll read the one tweet, and they won't see the thread that like gets into the nuance. And I I should stop doing that, but I guess I feel like I just have enough of like I'm kind of an idealist wrapped in a pessimist, wrapped in an optimist, wrapped in a pessimist. But if you peel back all the layers, there's like this little idealist at the center that still believes that like, people are ultimately good and like, can learn, grow, and connect with one another. And maybe that'll change one day and maybe it won't. But I think that my approach to Twitter is, even in like the Elon Musk stage, where I'm just like, I don't know what's going on with this. I don't know if Twitter's gonna like disappear, but it's like, I have had so many positive connections
Yes.
on that site. Like
Yes.
people that like had never had a Jewish interaction before, or that like, lived in a place without Jews except for them. And like, they were having to figure out how to navigate Jewish life remotely from lots of other Jews. Like people who like had never experienced a female rabbi before, or
Yes.
like, a queer rabbi, or like
Yes.
at somebody that comes from an interfaith background. Like there's been so much good there that I would hate to say,
Absolutely.
oh, it's just a force for evil that takes us away from the real world. Because like, I don't think that's what it is. I think that there are limits. Part of my Shabbat practice is to be off social media. So
Yeah.
I'm not Shomer Shabbos, Shabbat observant to the degree that some Jews are. Like I will still use electricity. I will still take the train around. I'll still spend money on some things, but I
Sure.
try to be more intentional. And part of my Shabbat practice is saying that I will check text and I will check email, because that's about like connection, but I won't do social media for those like 25 hours each week.
Yeah.
But I do think that there's a lot of good that can come out of it too. And I hope it doesn't get swallowed up.
One would hope. When it does feel like things are getting swallowed up, when it does feel like things are like real, like heavy pressure, and like you just need to like get a dosage of the good, in social media, are there any follows that you'd love to shout out that are like do you watch cute cat videos? Do you watch recipes? Do you have an ASMR channel you love?
ASMR, I feel conflicted about, because some of it I love and some of it drives me crazy. So I do not have an ASMR channel that I follow particularly. But yes, definitely cute cats. Definitely lots of cooking. Like, I mean, I don't even know about particular follows, but like, I love cooking videos.
Yeah.
Love my cat videos. Love my actual cat who's here somewhere. And my partner's also amazing with this, because like when he can tell, he'll sometimes look over at me and be like, what are you doing? And I'll be like, I'm tweeting. And I'll be like, are you sure this is a good idea right now? And he'll pull something up on, his computer or phone or whatever and help me to reset, which is great.
Yeah. I want to I want to lean into your partner and your marriage a little bit, because you wrote a very public and a very nuanced and insightful article on Alma, talking about some of the challenges of your marriage, and not specifically like the interpersonal stuff, but the challenge of just figuring out how to be ideologically wed. And this had a little bit to do with some of the different sects of Judaism, and this line that you've described about being culturally Jewish, but also not necessarily having all of the proper boxes ticked in such a way. Someone who wants to know all of the details about it can go and read it. But that to me feels like something that is a hell of a lot to carry. And I wonder if you can spend a moment or two just reflecting with us on it.
Sure. So, the article is really about institutional politics with different Jewish movements.
Yeah.
So I am what is called a patrilineal Jew. What that means is that my dad's Jewish, my mom's not.
Yep.
In some Jewish movements, that means that I am just as Jewish as anybody else. And in others, it means that I'm not Jewish at all, because Judaism has, for the last 1800 years-ish, used mostly something called matrilineal descent, which means that it doesn't matter what the father is. What matters is the birth canal out of which you come into the world. So I could go into so many details on all of the ways that I find that problematic in movements that claim to be egalitarian because of biological reductionism and other complexities there. But all of that to say that in the conservative movement and the Orthodox movements, I'm not considered Jewish, even though I am an ordained rabbi in the Reconstructionist movement and was raised Jewish in the Reform movement, which also says patrilineal descent goes. Where this got complicated is that my rabbi, the person I consider to be my rabbi, Barry Citron, is an 80-year-old man, a wonderful, wonderful human being who was like half the reason I went to rabbinical school, and he was ordained conservative. And so I am a big supporter of Jews and interfaith marriages. I was raised by an interfaith partnership. My sister's partner is not Jewish. I feel great about interfaith families. I fell for a Jew, which was surprising, and a man, which was, not unsurprising, but like I identify as pan, like it could have been
It could have gone any number of ways.
Yeah, it could have gone any number of ways. And I happened to fall for a Jewish man who was born in Jerusalem, raised mostly in the States. And so like identifies as Israeli American, but like doesn't speak fluent Hebrew and like did not spend most of his childhood in Israel. But anyway, like he's as Jewish as they come as far as like the check boxes. And so I was really like just upset because my rabbi would not be able to officiate my wedding to a Jew, not because of my partner, but because of me. Because I would not be considered Jewish. And I am so grateful that he actually chose to leave the movement, both to do my wedding and also to do his daughter's, because his daughter was marrying somebody who doesn't claim any faith tradition, but was not Jewish. And so he had these two weddings come up within a few months of each other. And I got to have him with us, which was, I mean, pretty incredible, because I when I emailed him to ask, I just expected he'd say no. But as far as Adami and me, it's interesting. Adami's my husband, my partner. We could have a whole conversation about the word husband and how I feel weird about it. But setting that aside,
I mean, you can lean in if you want. We have time.
Well, I mean, so like I'll just say I feel weird about just all the baggage that comes with the words husband and wife. We have what I would like to consider a true partnership, like he's making dinner tonight because I'll be leading services. After this call, I'm gonna put away the dishes from earlier, like we are, to the degree that it's possible, really in an equal partnership. And so it's not like he's the breadwinner and I'm sitting at home. I mean, I am sitting at home, but that's because I'm working from home this morning, but like it's not like we have that traditional setup of husband and wife. And it also feels weird for me as a queer person to use the word husband because I don't like the assumptions that might cause people to make about me. So that's a little sidebar, but all that to say that, he grew up in, I would say, kind of an Orthodox adjacent religious space, but at home he was almost completely secular. So he went to a Jewish day school and he went to an Orthodox synagogue, but at home they kind of did whatever. And so we've had really interesting discussions about like, what is religious life? What do we want for our own shared home? Because he's not super spiritual, but when I use kind of alternative prayer language, it's something that jars him. And so we're learning a lot from each other, because he's learning about these American movements of Judaism that weren't a part of his upbringing. And I'm getting more of an understanding of like the visceral reactions that some folks raised in more traditional settings have to alternative religious practice. And so it's, I think, really good for both of us. And so far, we've managed very well. We have had some pretty spirited debates around certain topics over the years. And, we're still kind of, when it comes to things like circumcision, he's very pro, I am not. So there's stuff like that if we have children, we'll have to consider. But I think that I'm learning a lot from him and he's learning a lot from me. And so there's a beauty in that.
You mentioned working from home. Do you feel like your community, West End? Do you feel like it's mostly back to the pre-lockdown normal? Did they feel like they're back?
So, it's interesting. I joined West End in July 2020. So the first year and a half that I was there were completely on Zoom. I think, well,
Yeah.
maybe not completely, but like 90%. And then we ended up putting in an elevator for much of the last year, which has meant that I haven't had consistent access. In fact, it's only really in the last month that I've had regular access to my office, which is a godsend. It's so nice to have a place to like put my books and, have quiet meetings and all of that. So I'm still not going in every day. I'm probably in 2 or 3 days a week, but so I'm still kind of hybrid in that sense.
Sure.
But our services are now mostly back in person, which is really beautiful. West End has a lot of seniors, and we want to be as accessible as possible. So we actually are still requiring masking during services. And then we have people, if they want to, unmask afterwards for refreshments and things. And so people are having to make their own decisions about what they're comfortable doing. And we still have an online presence, like a pretty significant one. So, half our services at this point are hybrid. So I actually have a laptop on the Bima, on the altar.
Nice.
And I'm like looking at Zoom, and I'm, I'm like reading things out from the chat. We're unmuting people to share readings and stuff like that. And then the other half at this point, we're doing more as live stream. So it's like people can still be on Zoom with one another and see the service, but they're not, I don't have the laptop on the Bima, and it's a little bit more singular focus. Although I'll usually say something to the Zoom people once or twice and, remind them to interact with each other. And then we're still keeping as of now, one service a month that's completely on Zoom. And that's partly because we have now remote members who joined during the pandemic who live in, Colorado, Ohio, Maryland, and so since they're not able to ever, unless they make a special trip, come in person, we want to make sure that there's at least one service a month where like everybody's on equal footing and where like we're all in our Zoom boxes instead of like the people in the room being all together and the Zoom people feeling like they're disconnected.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a weird new world to be doing spiritual leadership. Yeah. I'm excited
Very,
to
very
see
weird.
what comes next. Who knows, right?
It's so, we're in such an interesting flex point, and I really don't know what the future holds for religious engagement and religious community, but I think it could be amazing, or it could end up, continuing to fall to pieces a little bit and, with people continuing to disaffiliate and things like that.
Yeah. We're at the end of our time. I am so grateful for our conversation. We'll pause to, maybe we'll have to have you back to talk about so many other things. But I'm so grateful for the time that you've you spent chatting to us today. We have just one final question to ask you, a little bit about impact. Same question we ask everybody who's been on the show, and that is, what do you want the world to look like when you're done with it?
That is a beautiful question. Thank you for having me. It's been just lovely and different from a lot of the other podcasts I've done, which is special to have like some different topics come up.
Cheers to that.
What do I want the world to be like when I'm done with it? Gosh, I mean, one day I won't be here. Right. I hope I won't. I hope that I won't like ever be done trying to make the world better, and that at some point I will die and the world will be better than it was when I was alive. But I mean, what I really hope for is that, like I said, we can reach a point where people are connected with one another more than they are now. I've been seeing this meme go around about recently about this debate about like, as an adult, should you invite your friends to help you move? And like people being like, no, like you're an adult, just like hire movers. And other people being like, no, like invite people, like be in community. And like, that's absolutely what I dream of, is like a time where it's not just about our little tiny nuclear families trying to do it all, but it's like, it does take a village. It takes everybody working together to try to make this world a little bit more inclusive, a little bit more connected. I think if we can all see, we have this concept of B'Tselem Elohim, being made in the divine image. Like if we can all see that in one another, that's what I want the world to reflect as well, that we see that divine image in everybody that we encounter, that we bring our kindest selves, because we don't know who's going through what.
Yeah.
And just lean in from a place of care instead of a place of suspicion, which is really hard to do in 2023 in, like big city life or wherever else you are. It's easy to be suspicious and understandable. But I hope that by the time I leave the world, it'll be a world that is a little bit more focused on kindness and connection rather than getting ahead. Also, capitalism is bad.
And one final time on both accounts, that will preach. Emily, it's so good to chat to you and to get to catch up a bit. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you so much.
My thanks to Rabbi Emily Cohen. You can follow her on Twitter at @RabbiCohen, on Instagram at em.cohen. You can check out her website, rabbiemilycohen.com, read her HeyAlma articles, subscribe to her Substack, check out the podcast, Jew 2 Tales of the Mixed Multitude, all at the links in the episode description. Thank you so much for tuning in to Uncommon Good with Pauly Reese. This program is produced in Southwest Philadelphia on the unceded land of the Lenni Lenape tribe and the Black Bottom community. Our associate producers are Willa Jaffe and Kia Watkins. If you enjoyed listening to the show, please support us by leaving us a 5-star review and a comment, and subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts. It really does help people find us. Uncommon Good is also available on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram at Uncommon Good Pod. Follow us there for closed caption video content and more goodies. We love questions and feedback. You can send us a DM on social media or an email at uncommongoodpod@gmail.com. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time, wishing you every uncommon good, to do your uncommon good, to be the uncommon good.